Welcome to New England Authors. We record here in Cambridge, Massachusetts and broadcast across the region of New England. So good to have you. We have a great guest today, Andrea Chiovenda. He is a psychological anthropologist and a research fellow at the Department of Global Health and Social Medicine at the Harvard Medical School. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
So before I start, can you tell us what a psychological anthropologist is and does?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, psychological anthropology is the study of psychological dynamics, inner states, mental processes, both conscious and unconscious, within the cultural and social environment in which the individual that one is studying is immersed.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be done within there's a Sudhir Kakar, a psychoanalyst from India, who calls it the broth, within the cultural broth in which each individual is immersed. So the idea is that you can't analyze an isolated mind. You can't talk to an isolated mind. There's no such thing as an isolated mind. So the mind is immersed in what Sudhir Kakar calls a cultural broth, and we have to take into consideration what comes out of the interaction between the mind and the broth, in which it's immersed.
I see. Okay. So you studied in Afghanistan. You went to Afghanistan. You learned Pashto, and so can you tell us a little about it? When did you go? What was it like there?
So yeah, my fieldwork research, my doctoral fieldwork research, because now I have a new project with refugees, Afghan refugees in Greece.
Yes.
But my doctoral fieldwork was in Afghanistan, where I stayed for 18 months, so I knew Afghanistan in 2001, 2002 when I was a journalist. So I came first into Afghanistan right after the Taliban had fallen in December 2001, and when the troops had the international troops had just gotten to Kabul, and I passed through Pakistan, and from Pakistan into Afghanistan, and this environment really struck me. It really struck me as an incredibly interesting and devastated, unfortunately, landscape. And so when I went back to graduate school a few years later, I thought that it would have been an interesting place to research, to do research. And so I went back and I did research in a province called Nangarhar, at the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, in the southeast of Kabul. And it was not a walk in the park. Let's put it that way. So
difficult life.
It was not easy. It had its challenges. But it was also extremely interesting, and so I didn't regret it. So.
What did you go to study exactly?
So I moved after the first months. My fieldwork was between 2009 and 2013. The bulk of it, 12 months, was 2012, 2013. But 6 more months I had gone back and forth previously. And so I decided that masculinity was what interested me in Pashtun men. Pashtuns are the ethnicity that is majority in the place where I did my fieldwork, and masculinity is an extremely important and pervasive cultural idiom. Let's call it a value. It's a very androcentric society. It's,
very what society?
Androcentric means male-dominated.
Male
so
dominated.
um, more briefly, we would say male-dominated society, and very much so. And so the idea of masculinity, so how you're supposed to behave in order to be perceived, no?
Right.
As a good man, appropriate, manly man, as again you're expected by others to be. So that was what intrigued me, and I studied the psychological side of it. I studied how these norms that are pretty strict, these norms and expectations, were impacting the psychological dynamics of my informants, how they perceived, how they managed, inhabited, no, the norms that told them, well, you got to do this and this and this in order to be a proper man.
Yes, you use the word gaharti. Am I pronouncing it right?
So ghairat in Pashto means. So there's a colloquial expression, a man with attributes, let's say. Huh? Okay. It's colloquial enough to be understood. So
yeah.
So ghairat is the characteristic of a man to have his own attributes and to be not only an average man, but a manly man. There's a difference. There's two different nouns for a normal man, an average man, and a manly man, as one is supposed to be.
So you stayed with a family, or focused on a family, right? And
I lived by myself. I lived by myself, and I had several informants. Well, I met a lot of people, obviously. The person you're referring to was the son in a family that was very close to me.
Yes, yeah.
I didn't only focus on them. I in the book that will come out soon, hopefully, inshallah. There's 5 people that I focus a chapter on, and then 4 more people on whom about whom I give a rather shorter account.
So you paint a picture of a pretty harsh life there. Masculinity is you have to be a real man. One of your people says, people will treat you well because they are afraid of you, afraid of what you will be able to do against them if they disrespect you. So it's pretty...
Yeah, so yes, it is not easy to live there under those circumstances, and so yes, this is what also was troubling these guys, because not everybody was ready or willing or felt attuned to a certain kind of life and expectations. So when I say manly man, I mean by their own criteria, not in universal terms, right? By their own criteria, there were features, characteristics that authentic man had to display, and these are not unknown to people in the West. For instance, there's vast swaths of the Western world in which these values that have a lot to do with honor and shame, with the dominance on the women of the family, also of the have to do with the capacity to defend, even with violence, the rights of oneself and one's own family. So these are values that were very, very dear to them, and that have been shaped. I mean, it's not the case here of making a culturalist argument, so to speak. So the ecological environment, the historical precedents, the way that globalization has impacted them since a long time.
Yes.
You know, well before the English assaults on Afghanistan in the early 19th century, all of that has contributed to the creation of certain models,
Right.
models of masculinity that have a lot also in common with areas of, as I was saying, the Western world, from the southern states of the United States, for instance, to North Africa, Southern Europe, Spain, Italy, Greece, Turkey,
yes.
and all that area of the Middle East, the Arab Middle East, the Persian Middle East. So it's a very big area in which certain values are shared, and so it's nothing that we should consider like out of this world. Like, you know, this is
Right.
such an exotic place that crazy things happen. It's only a matter of degree, not of kind. you
Yeah.
know?
So this is New England Authors, and we're exploring Afghanistan with our guest, Andrea Chiovenda. And it's so, I wanted to bring this to the United States. I mean, we're a pretty macho country here, too. Look at American football. We're very militaristic. Is there a comparison that you'd like to make?
Not quite. I saw something more culturally close to what I've seen in this Pashtun context, with certain instances of American culture that are not easily generalizable. Like, again, as I said, the culture of the South, with the idea of honor, the idea of qualities, no, the importance of the army, military activity. Those are things that reminded me, when I was in Afghanistan, and even in, there are certain other things in my own country. I'm from Italy, so in the southern part of Italy, there's a lot that I found resonant, like, some degree of relationship between men and women. The idea of the family as a nucleus, the focus of social interaction. So in America, America has a strong, I think, has a strong idea of nation, obviously, and certain things had to be inculcated in the minds of people in order to create a nation out of a very diverse ethnic and cultural environment. And certain things that have been pushed on are, as you say, achievements in foreign policy. And when you say foreign policy, you mean military endeavors. So this obviously is absent in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is not a country with a strong state, and has never been.
I see.
So there's no such thing as the myth of a national military and a national expansionism, the idea of, as it has been in the United States, an idea of military endeavors as reflecting the value and maybe even the honor of the country.
Right.
It's a more fragmented environment, more inwardly looking than outwardly looking in these terms. In terms, say, as the United States is an example of foreign policy, for instance. No, so in that I think of outwardly looking. So, there's some similarities, but.
Okay, could you tell us a little? You mentioned the Mujahideen in your book there.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan called them freedom fighters, if I remember.
Yeah, freedom fighters of a person is a terrorist of another person,
yes,
and vice versa.
Yes.
So the Mujahideen that Ronald Reagan called freedom fighters were not that different from the Taliban than George Bush called terrorists. So they were the, the Taliban were the successors of the Mujahideen. Many of my informants, in fact, were quite adamant in saying that they saw a very, very clear thread, fil rouge, almost, between the Mujahideen, the fanaticism, the fundamentalism, religious fundamentalism of many of the Mujahideen groups and the Taliban when they came out. And I must say, I am talking about the Pashtun environment. Of course, there were Mujahideen of different ethnicity and religious faith, but to many in the Pashtun areas, it seems that the Taliban just picked up the legacy of the intransigence of the Mujahideen,
right.
And the violence of the Mujahideen. So,
now you talk about good and bad masculinity and the difference between urban and rural. I wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Good and bad masculinity, that's what my informants told me. That's words of some of the people that I worked with, what they considered bad masculinity, what they considered good masculinity. But that is obviously relative, not only to a moment, but also to sometimes the person that is speaking. So one of the people that I spoke to was very clear in making in creating a watershed between wanton violence, freewheeling violence, and violence that was, according to him, that had a higher purpose. But these things, it is important to record the perception of this. Not to I think pause too much on the objectivity, on the universal value, because what is wanton violence?
Right.
What does it mean, wanton violence? For you, it might be one thing, and for some other, might be another thing. So anyway, the point was that a bad masculinity might be linked to what is seen as immoral actions.
Right.
So it's not a free exercise of masculine prowess. It has to be related to a degree of morality. This degree of morality, on the other hand, might change over time.
I see.
And that's what I did find, because the problem was that after 35 years of violence, practically from 1979 to now, 40 practically,
Yeah.
The principles that sustain and authorize what is moral and what is immoral have changed.
I see.
So a continuous state of violence, continuous state of conflict, a continuous state of unrest did change the perception of, especially the young generation, on what is morally acceptable violence. In Kabul, a town of 6 million, a city of 6 million, where in most cases one manages to disappear in anonymity because there's so many people.
Yeah.
And only up to a certain point you can cluster together with people, say, from your district, from your village, etc. You could decide to go live in a different neighborhood of the city without much scandal.
Yeah.
And literally drown in anonymity, which is what many people that live the rural areas, because of their unwillingness to abide by certain norms, look for. So the anonymity is what allows you to behave in a different way and be exempt almost from certain rules that otherwise you would be shackled to back in your village.
Now, I heard you speak at an anthropology conference in San Jose, California, and you were talking there about Afghan refugees in Greece.
Yeah.
Now, are the same norms carried over from their society over to Greece?
So that's well, that's a very interesting question. And the answer, the short answer, that it depends. And obviously, what I could see in my own research is that in many cases one is drawn to simply transport, no, norms